In this video I am going to look at a game I played last Tuesday in the first round of this year's Horsham Club Championship. I had the white pieces and was up against Rob McDonald. e4. This was a small surprise to my opponent, who had been expecting d4 as in our previous games when I had been white. However, e4 is the move which I have been playing over the last year or so. c5. I had not been sure how my opponent would reply to e4. I thought he might play the Sicilian defence, and this proved to be the case. Knight f3, d6. This is black's most popular move. Bishop b5 check, the Moscow variation. I chose this line rather than the open Sicilian, as I have been analysing it recently and wanted to try it out. Knight d7. This is black's sharpest response, hoping to win the bishop pair should white be provoked into playing bishop takes d7. The downside is that black risks falling behind in development. a4. This is an unusual move which I have been analysing recently. White prevents black from expanding on the queen side with a6 and b5. a4 is also in a sense a waiting move. White wants to see what formation black is aiming for before deciding on whether to play d4 or not. a6, bishop e2. This is part of the concept of a4. White wants to keep the bishop rather than swap on d7. Knight g f6, knight c3. Now my opponent had to decide on which pawn formation to adopt. He chose g6 with a dragon, although aiming for e6 or e5 was also possible. a5. White fixes the weakness on b6 before black has the chance to play b6. If black does play b6, then he can meet a5 with b5. Bishop g7, castle. Now my opponent played an interesting move. Queen c7. Black aims to play knight b8 c6 to attack the a pawn without allowing e5 by white. I now had to decide whether to keep the position closed with d3 or open things up with d4. The problem with d4 is that c takes d4, knight takes d4 leads to a good version of the dragon for black, as white can no longer castle queenside, which is his strongest plan. Instead I played at d3. White decides to keep things closed. Castles. At this point I had come to the end of my opening preparation and had to decide what to play next. I chose h3, intending to play bishop e3 without allowing black to molest the bishop with knight g4. However, as I didn't in fact play bishop e3, this turned out to be a waste of time. Knight d2 at once was better, intending both f4 and knight c4. Knight b8 can then be met with f4, knight c6, knight c4, bishop e6, and now white should sacrifice a pawn with knight e3, knight takes a5, f5, bishop d7, g4, and he has definite compensation in the form of a kingside attack. However, I played h3 and play continued, knight b8, knight d2, knight c6. Black now has some awkward pressure on the a pawn, so white needs to find a good way to deal with this. Here I chose f4. I played this with the idea of preventing knight takes a5 by tactical means. However, it seems this should not work. Knight c4 is what I should have played. I was concerned about bishop e6, knight b6, rook e8, bishop d2, knight takes a5, but after knight cd5, bishop takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes d5, e takes d5, b6, rook a4, white will get the pawn back due to the awkward arrangement of black's pieces. Note that bishop takes b2 is a mistake because of c3 trapping the bishop. Anyway, I played f4, and now black should have taken the pawn, knight takes a5. e5, d takes e5, f takes e5, queen takes e5, rook takes a5 was white's idea, winning a piece, but black can easily improve on this. For instance, after f takes e5, knight e8 was better when black is a pawn up and the e-pawn is weak. Also, after e5, knight e8 leaves black a pawn up while white's centre is overextended. However, black decided to play e6, but now white is fine. Knight c4. White defends the pawn on a5 while eyeing up the weakness on b6. Bishop d7. Bishop f3. White increases his control over d5 to make it harder for black to break the d5. Rook a d8. Bishop d2. Now, knight d4 moving the knight to a strong square looks promising for black, but black decided to play knight b4. Here he hints at d5, but this proves not to be possible. Now I decided to go for e5. This looks like white's best practical try. There is no way to improve the position of his pieces, so he should look for a way to go forward. Black now has 3 possible moves. Fortunately for white, he did not choose the best one. Worst is knight on f to d5, when knight takes d6 just wins a pawn. Knight e8 seems to be best. I thought this move was bad because of e takes d6, knight takes d6, knight takes d6, queen takes d6, bishop takes b7, when white wins a pawn. But when I analysed it afterwards with Stockfish, the computer suggested that after queen c7, bishop e4, rook fe8, black had compensation for the material. This seems to be the case as his pieces are active and the pawn on a5 is weak. However, black chose d takes e5. This is a mistake as white's bishop on d2 will come into the game via g5. F takes e5, knight fd5, bishop g5. Now rook moves can be met by knight e4 or queen d2 when grabbing the pawn on e5 looks too risky. f6 was my opponent's choice, looking to play actively. E takes f6, bishop takes f6. This is a mistake as it weakens black on the dark squares, following the exchange of bishops. Bishop takes f6. Now my opponent decided to play actively with rook takes f6, but I was able to respond with knight e4, attacking the rook on f6 while bringing the knight to a strong outpost on e4. Black retreated with rook on f to f8 and white played c3, forcing black to retreat with knight c6. Queen d2. I could have captured on c5 here and a couple of moves later, but playing to activate my pieces was more sensible as I was starting to run short of time. Black now tried to activate his pieces with knight e5, knight takes e5, queen takes e5. Again I could have grabbed the c-pawn, but this was not necessary. Rook a e1. White now threatens knight takes c5 with a discovered attack. Queen c7. Black moves his queen back to a safe square. Queen h6. White looks to attack on the king's side with knight g5, threatening mate on h7. Bishop c8. Black prepares to bring the queen across to the defence with queen g7 at an appropriate moment. Knight g5. Knight f4. Black counterattacks d3, but this is easily met with bishop e4. Black could not play knight takes d3 because of rook takes f8 check, rook takes f8, bishop takes d3, winning a piece. Instead, black brought his queen over to the king's side with queen g7, and I decided to retreat with queen h4 as I could not see anything after the exchange of queens. However, after queen takes g7 check, king takes g7, white has a surprising tactic, bishop takes b7. With the point, bishop takes b7, rook takes f4, rook takes f4, knight takes e6 check, king f6, knight takes d8. This should be winning for white, but is a bit messy. In any case, keeping the queens on is also good. So, after queen h4, white now threatens black's knight on f4. Black sensibly played knight d5, bringing his knight to a strong central post. Again, black cannot play knight takes d3 because of rook takes f8 check, and all 3 recaptures lose. Queen takes f8 allows queen takes h7 mate. Rook takes f8, bishop takes d3 wins a piece, and king takes f8, knight takes e6 check, bishop takes e6, queen takes d8 check, king f7, queen c7 check, king f8, queen takes g7 check, king takes g7, bishop takes d3, leaves white a rook up in the endgame. I now played rook takes f8 check. Here I was running very short of time. I only had 2 minutes plus increment following this move. I decided to simplify towards a very good endgame, a good practical decision under the circumstances. Rook takes f8, rook f1, rook takes f1 check, king takes f1. White has a big positional advantage, while the exchanges have made it much more difficult for black to create counterplay. Knight e3 check. Black plays for some tricks, but white successfully negotiates them. King e2, knight f5, queen f4, queen f6, king e1, e5, queen d2, knight g3. Black threatens queen f1 mate, but white can stop this easily enough. Bishop f3. White now consolidates. Both players were now down to playing on the increment. This explains the subsequent oversights. Knight f5, knight e4, queen e7, queen f2, knight h4, bishop e2. White avoids the exchange of knight for bishop. Black now makes a terrible blunder. Queen f7. I had not expected this move, as I thought that black would want to keep queens on the board. Also, in addition to being generally undesirable, the move both hangs the knight on h4 and walks into a fork. Queen takes f7 check. Queen takes h4 was also winning, but swapping queens before winning a piece is obviously simpler. King takes f7. Now, knight d6 check just wins a piece. However, I missed this and played king f2 instead. The explanation for this oversight is that I was running very short of time and focused on defending g2 and capturing on c5. c4. My opponent gave me another chance to play the same move. Now, knight d6 check again wins a piece. However, I played d takes c4, once more missing the chance for the same reasons. Fortunately, white still has a winning endgame, but it now requires more work to convert. King e7, g4. White threatens king g3 when black will have to give up a pawn with g5 to save the knight. h6. Black prepares to play g5 without losing a pawn. King g3, g5, bishop d3. White now plays to restrict the black knight to h4. Black now had a chance to bring out the knight with knight g6, when white should be careful. Knight takes g5 loses a piece after knight f4, which is best avoided. Knight d6 is a more sensible choice. Knight f4 is met by knight takes c8 check, winning a piece, and king takes d6, bishop takes g6, king c5, b3 leads to a winning endgame. Instead, black chose king d8 and play continued with white gradually improving his position. Knight f6, bishop e6, b3, king c7, bishop e4, bishop f7, knight d5 check, king c8, king f2. White is steadily working towards victory, but there is no immediate win in sight. However, black was now anxious to bring his knight back into the game and blundered with knight g6. I had anticipated this, so there was no chance of me overlooking the refutation this time. Bishop takes g6, bishop takes g6, knight e7 check. White wins a piece with an easily won endgame, so black resigned.